Thanks for joining us at Ride On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet.
This review covers the Monogram School Bus by Tom Daniel. It's a 1/24 scale kit and a skill level 2 with approximately 100 pieces, molded in yellow, metallic gray, and chrome. The kit features transparent orange clear side and front windows, molded in paper-thin plastic printed with children's faces on them. And this replicates the original issue box art with a tilt-up funny car body and colorful decals. It has two-piece rear drag slicks with Racemaster lettering molded into them and two front no-logo front tires with directional sidewalls and a great instruction sheet. The Tom Daniel School Bus Kit was first released in the early 70s. It's always been a favorite of the builders, and now Tom Daniel's School Bus Kit is re-released for us to enjoy once again. This kit features dual blown 427 engines for a massive 854 cubic inch displacement, and also a fiberglass school bus body with big spoilers and a trick funny car chassis. For the contents of this kit, and it features separately bagged tires and a colorful acetate sheet for the windows, as well as some really nice looking decals. Now, as we're going along, you'll see some products here that you should always use the manufacturer's suggested safety and use guidelines for in order to ensure your own protection. We'll be using Model Master's liquid cement, sometimes super glue for the small parts, and white glue or crystal clear for the acetate and clear window parts. Before you get started with the build, remember to look over the parts. There's a little bit of flash that's easy to clean up with a hobby knife and some fine sandpaper, and the front clip has some die lines that will need to be addressed before painting, so fine emery board was used to clean these up too. These emery boards are actually an excellent tool. They provide, a straight line surface so that you can attack any of the flash at a different angle. This one's equivalent to about 1,000 or 1,200 grit, and they make a nice smooth line across a parting line like this so that you can finish it up with some fine paper in the same direction. It seems like the newer re-released Monogram kits have quite a bit of mold release that they use for the parts, so especially a large piece like this, I would suggest you wash the parts in some mild soapy water, warm not hot, and then let those air dry to make sure there's nothing there to disrupt the paint surface. So after attending to any of the blemishes and mold lines and letting it dry, I painted the entire body inside and out with a white Krylon spray paint primer. Also note that it's important for you to make sure that your paints are compatible, your primers and your color coats, and so in this case I used a Krylon Sun Yellow to make sure that there wouldn't be any paint reactions, and so I gave it a couple of light mist coats and then a couple of wet coats to fully coat the inside and outside of the school bus. Next, I painted the frame and the chassis rails with some Duplicolor gunmetal gray. Didn't even need primer for that. Waited about 20 minutes between coats using some light coats at first, and it's important to do light coats with no primer. The paint is too heavy and it can attack the plastic and make the surface look wrinkled or sandy if it's too thick, so it wasn't important to have these bright and shiny, so a uniform color was applied, and it's up to the builder to decide how you want to prime and paint your body, but that's what I used for this build. I taped off the body here with some Scotch brand painter's tape, and it's good stuff with just about the right amount of tackiness to not pull off any of the paint from your model. So it seems like a lot of work here, but it's kind of easier than having to repaint your model if you don't get it on just right, especially taping off the inside of the windows and the wheel openings here. It helps keep overspray from getting past the paint edges and onto other areas, so it's especially important when the colors are so contrasting like these two will be. I used a Duplicolor semi-gloss black for the fenders and the windows, etc. inside. And the reason for this was because that's what I had on hand, but you should always test the small area to make sure there's no paint reactions before you do full-blown paint. And you can also do this by staging it on a plastic spoon. Just make sure that there's no adverse reactions between the different styles and types of paint. Now we'll add the acetate windows, and it's a slow process. Just make sure there's glue around the whole outer edge of the inner body, but use it sparingly. I used some Tester's tube glue for this and allowed it to tack up for a few minutes before the glass was carefully set into place to keep it from smearing. And then line up the corners of the window with the location lines in the body and let the window kind of fall into place there. Now use a light pressure around the edges then to set it in, and it's made of acetate, so it's real thin, and just tack it down to make sure that it's got a good seal against the body from the inside. It's a real thin edge to this stuff, and it just grabs the glue, so don't use fast setting glue here, because the acetate will frost from that. Now we can add the decals. They're very good, typical water slide type, but they, just soak them in the warm water for about half a minute and let them stand until the design starts to loosen. Put them into place on the model and then slip the paper out and kind of use a damp towel to smooth it out. Some of these are pretty large. You may want to consider using some of the aftermarket setting solutions to make sure they conform to the contours of the body. The two body pieces, the front clip and the main body area of the cabin, they don't have any real positive locating points, but there's a clear line where they should meet up, so those gluing areas will have to be removed of the paint as for a better gluing bond. So scrape that off or sand it off, line them up a little bit, and then like sit them on a flat surface, and after gluing, so the parts will stay straight and flush to each other. I used some Tester's tube glue there too, slow setting to make sure that I could adjust it and not frost any of the windows or paint. Now allow that to dry overnight before putting any pressure on it. To get a realistic tail light look, I used a transparent red marker on the tail light, the chrome tail lights, to make them look like a reflective tail light, and they're pretty convincing actually. And you can paint them with some stoplight red, also bottle paint, but the marker trick's pretty handy, and it looks pretty good. Now we can assemble the engines, and the first engine is the short one without the transmission. It has 5 parts that are assembled before painting, and the cylinder heads and the blower manifold are the same for both engines. I used Krylon yellow to paint those the same as the body. Engine number 2 is assembled the same manner as the first engine, but it has the transmission molded on to the back end, and that'll be the rear position engine. So go ahead and put those together and then paint those with the same color paint. The blower assemblies are identical, made up of 3 pieces each, so scrape the chrome off before trying to glue the edges for a good bond, and then everything fit together well, and there's clearly determined location points for each one. The belt drive and the back blower panel will only fit on the proper ends, so there won't be any problem figuring out which end to use those on. I used some slow setting glue to make sure that they would slide into place and square up. Attach the blowers to the top of the engines there. They fit nicely and snap right into place, so there's clear attachment points for that. Now the blower belt was attached to the engines, and then the blower belts were painted with some semi-gloss bottle paint, semi-gloss black, and the headers and valve covers were put on after the engines were assembled to the chassis. Paint the steering wheel handles and the steering arm with some semi-gloss black, and the fire extinguisher comes chrome, and I used a red Sharpie to make it look red. The switch panel was painted with silver bottle paint, and once dry, the switches were colored with some red, green, and orange Sharpie markers for highlighting. The firewall, steering wheel, gauge, and steering arm all went together well, and there's clear locations set for those to be placed on the upper chassis. The foot pedals, fire extinguisher, and shifter then also have clear location points, so go ahead and put those into place there on the floor. The bullet style fuel tank comes in two pieces, so scrape the chrome off and glue that together. And you might want to put a band on it to make sure it stays in place till it dries. The water tank is molded into two parts as well, and as these are they're chrome plated and they have a split seam on them. The only way to get away from that is to sand off the edges and putty that, and then get it either re-chromed or painted a different color. Otherwise, you just live with it like we did back in the 60s and 70s. Now, it fits together nicely. Just make sure you clean that chrome off before you glue it together. There's a good clear location point for the fuel tank there on the upper chassis and the water tank, so it doesn't take much effort to get those together. Fast setting glue was used because they'll go right into place. Grab the seat out of the kit and spray the seat itself flat black, and then for the belts, a small brush and some Testors red and silver paint was used to highlight the buckles, etc. Then you can go ahead and place the seat perfectly there into the cockpit. It fits nicely. Finish up the rest of the cockpit here by adding the roll cage into place. It's a one-piece unit and can be painted flat spray paint prior to installation there, and it fits perfectly into the chassis as well. We can turn our attention to the front suspension parts, and they were painted flat black, and the chrome parts were scraped at the gluing points. The radius rods and the front axle went together well, and there was nice location points to lock them down in that area. They almost felt like they snapped into place, and the Testors glue was used to slow set those parts to allow for adjustments to make sure they are straight and in position. And the coil springs went on easily into the proper locations, and there were no issues for the front end parts here. The drag link goes on from the top of the front axle to the steering box on the firewall. You can see the arrow pointing to that here, and that's the steering box is molded in. So scrape the chrome from the drag link and the paint from the steering box for the best bond, and put that into place. The rear end assembly is pretty simple and easy to build. It comes in two pieces, and I painted it silver gray, and they were glued together. Then the wheelie bars are glued to the rear end, and the whole assembly is glued into place back there on the chassis. And test fit everything though before gluing it to make sure that you can tell where the parts are going to go. With the rear end in place and the glue set there, the two engines are put into the lower chassis. There's clear positioning points there for placement. So go ahead and make sure you scrape any glue or paint that needs to be removed for the glue, and then put those into place. The transmission fit exactly to the rear end housing there. I added some detail to the headers by drilling out the ends with a small jeweler's bit there, and then the tip of a Sharpie blade was used to kind of ream that out, spin it out to remove it, so it looks like a large exit hole for the exhaust. After drilling out the ends, I painted the headers silver spray paint, and the holes were blacked out with a little flat black bottle paint. It's a simple way to add detail, but they look much better once you've done a little bit of attention to the ends there. Now we can glue the headers into place. They fit right there onto the cylinder heads with the pipes going through the lower and out the lower chassis. Now you can mate the two-piece chassis and frame rails together. The fit was really good. There's really no need to adjust where that positions, so gluing points were obvious. Just test fit before you put the glue on and put that together. After you've gotten to this point with the two-piece chassis mated together, you can add the rocker covers to the engines. If you tried and do that before you put those pieces together, they won't fit over the rocker covers, so you have to wait until now. So scrape the glue off of those and put them into place. Assemble the two-piece drag slicks now, and that's pretty much how the Tom Daniel kits were designed. So it'd be nice if they were one piece, and you can always go to the aftermarket for drag slicks, but we're going to use the kit's parts here. So I put those together, and then I scuffed those tread areas with the emery board to give it a used look. Now there's a lip on each side where the tires are glued together, and that needs to be sanded a little bit too, since leaving a shine on them will cause a fragile bond between the pieces. So the two pieces are glued with some fast setting glue and allowed to dry, and there's going to be a seam in the center of the tire. So the only way to get rid of that, of course, it would be to sand it down, smooth it out with some modeling putty, and then resurface that edge. Or, like I said, there's aftermarket tires provided, but they don't look too bad. You just have to live with that seam if you use the kit supplied tires. So once the glue has set on the tires, go ahead and add the wheel fronts and wheel backs. These are wrinkled slicks, so note the wrinkles and the markings go to the outside. The front tires go together pretty easily. Paint the wheel backs silver or black, whatever you prefer, and then just pop those in the backs and the fronts with the chrome portion sticking out, and you've got your tires ready to go on the chassis. Now just pop those tires onto the axle spindles, and the stance looks good when you get those into place, and the build's starting to look really clean and coming together. The wheels went on smoothly on the axles, so you hardly need any pressure, just kind of squeeze them into place. So the blower comes in two pieces here, and it was test fitted to make sure that it fits, no issues there. And after the blower scoop was put together, I painted it with some silver spray paint, and the chrome air intake was glued into place at the front end, and it was glued to the top of the blower bodies. And since it was test fit before, we knew there was no problem, so just go ahead and attach that. Now we'll mount the body to the clips on the back end, as you can see here in the white circles. Those are glued to the chassis, and then the bar is glued to the inside of the body at the back end. We use some fast setting glue to put those into place and make sure there's no paint on the glue points. Use some even pressure to get the bar inside the body and into the clips on the chassis. Just be patient and make sure you try not to break anything off there, and slip that into place. You could even use a little like vegetable oil to lubricate that to make sure that it slips into place without too much pressure. On the sides of the body up towards the front by the headers, there's a couple of body lockdown points on the chassis, and these two areas simply slide into the notches molded into the body, and the notches may need a little paint cleaned out there to make sure that they clear and that those will slide into place, and the body should lock over them and then raise off them easily. Well, there you have it. Another great creation from Tom Daniel, reissued by Monogram for us to enjoy once again. These kits were getting pretty pricey on the open market. It's an easy kit to build. Just about anybody could put this together, and it provides a great slump buster too for the seasoned veteran. But it comes molded in yellow, so it doesn't actually really even need to be painted, and anybody could build it. It's pretty simplistic, but boy does it look cool when you're done. I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. We hope you liked this premium step-by-step model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. But you can find us on Facebook and at our website www.rideonreplicas.com. Thanks!